Welcome back to the Bit by Bit podcast. In today's episode, I speak to Ben Prentice. Ben started the website WTF Happened in 1971. If you're not familiar with the website, I suggest you click on the link. Maybe you're in quarantine. I know I am. It's a weird world out there. Maybe you're looking and you're thinking, what's going on and how do we get to this stage? We've got, again, like we did in 2008, a load of money being printed. It's paying out, it looks like the wrong people. People have misallocated capital. People have bought back their own stocks. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Again, for anyone who hasn't looked into this, that's normal. Companies can just buy back their own stock to keep the prices artificially high. And then when they don't have any money because we have a recession or a depression, then they just put their hands out and they ask the government to print a load of money, which devalues yours, and they get it. You don't, but they do. So if you want to look back and think, well, how do we get into this situation where this is normal? The best place to start, in my opinion, is this website. And you have a look and you say, what the fuck happened in 1971? So we're going to jump in. Ben will explain all of this much better than I can. I really enjoyed this episode. It was really nice to have a chat with him. It's a website I think very highly of, and this is one of my better interviews, despite having some real irritating technical issues. We had, well, I think basically everyone is on the internet watching Netflix or whatever they're watching. We had real issues taking the call, but we persevered. I've done some editing to try and put it all together. Ideally, I'd like to do another one in the future, but I think you're going to get a lot from this. I really hope that you can bear with it. There's a few bits in there, maximum of 10, 15 seconds where you'll just hear a load of garbled nonsense. But other than that, I think I've edited it okay. So, anyway, I hope this relieves you of your boredom, and I hope everyone is safe and well. If after listening to this interview you have any questions, either reach out to me or to Ben. I hope you enjoy. Ben, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to start by asking you, what led you to Bitcoin? How did you find it? What were you doing? What was happening in your life, and how did you stumble across it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've known about Bitcoin for quite some time, but I didn't get into it right when I first heard about it. I learned about Bitcoin on Slashdot probably in 2010 or 2011, and understood that it was. I understood then that it was like an anonymous e-cash of some sort, and I did think that idea was interesting, but at the same time, and after I just kind of thought, well, that probably won't work. And then, a few years later, I did see the Silk Road stuff popping up, which I thought was even more interesting because people were using anonymous eCash to transact over the internet. And, that actually got me to be interested enough to try to just acquire some so I could learn more about it. And I went to, I remember ending up on MT Gox, Mount Gox. And,
proper early then.
Well, I didn't let me finish the story because you'd think so, right? But so I got on there and I was starting to create an account, and they were like, what you have to provide your bank details and your license. And I was like, wait a second, I thought this was, I thought it was an anonymous. Yeah, I thought the whole point of it was that it was on anonymous internet money. And I was like, this is no good. So I actually closed up Mt. Gox, and I never.
Oh no!
Yeah, not that even if I had it then, probably would have sold a little bit after it, rose.
Yeah.
Rose in price, or probably would have lost it all when Mt. Gox went down or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think, I was trying to do some more research on how to get some, and I looked into getting some from ATMs, and I was like, oh, okay. And I tried to look around for some local ATMs and never really found any. And I think I kind of just forgot about it until around 2017 when the price just started going crazy. And not that I was following it at the time, but it started like popping up in on news sources that I read, and I was like, this thing is still around, and why is the price going up? Like, what is the mechanism behind that? Why, and why has it grown so much over this time? And that's what led me to start learning about it. And it was very difficult at first to find good information about it. Because I think I started off on YouTube, and there were all these people that wanted, trading and showing all this DA and charts and all this stuff. And that was like a lot of the YouTube content. And it took me a while to find Reddit. Then I found some Andreas videos, and Andreas was, it's a very good introduction to trying to understand how, you really have to shift the way that you think about this thing. It's not just like a debit card or whatever like that. And that helped me a lot. And then eventually I found Twitter and the podcast scene. And then that's when I dove deep and found like Austrian economics. And I think that's pretty much that, I think in order to understand Bitcoin, you have to acquire some, and that will compel you to learn about it. And that was the start of my rabbit hole journey. Sure.
So when you dove in 2017, were you already fairly sort of technically competent, or was it something that was, did you find that a little bit of a hurdle?
Technically competent with Bitcoin, or just in general? Like computers?
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah, I've always been a kind of a nerd. I'm not like a software developer or anything, but I've always been a advanced user of computers and devices and gadgets. So it was relatively easy for me to pick up. I think I started off in Coinbase, and then I, as I started into the Twitter scene and start to learn the mantras of not your keys, not your coins. I started learning about wallets and got a few wallets, and eventually got a hardware wallet. And, now I have at least 2 nodes running in the house, and
nice.
Planning on getting more wallets. And, yeah,
nice.
It is certainly a learning curve though. Even for somebody who is technically inclined thing.
Yeah.
Most of it's just wrapping your head around different ways of thinking about, because we're used to thinking about digital data that can be copied, and, we're not very good at digital security. So trying to, learn about digital security and physical security of keys, which are, physical things, and about digital security as far as attack surface and all that. It is a learning curve for anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you started learning about all this stuff, was there a moment where something really hit you, or can you remember? Because I look back and I can't remember a moment. Definitely Andreas Antonopoulos' videos really helped me a lot to get into it, but I can't remember a clicking point where I went, fuck, like, wow. There was maybe a few. What about for you?
From Andreas was, there's something big here and I still don't understand it, and I need to keep digging. And 6 months later, after I'd started to get into Twitter and started to find people like Pierre Richard and started to hear about Austrian economics, so I actually ended up getting in a discussion group. There's a great guy, Justin Moon, who's a developer. I
did his course.
Yeah, Build Bootcamp.
Yeah.
He just kind of randomly on Twitter one day was like, I want to start a Austrian economics book club. And I'd been hearing about what's Austrian economics. And so basically that moment you're talking about where it was like, whoa, we had that moment like 3 or 4 times a week. We had a 1-hour call, and it was like 4 times in this one call. We were all like, holy crap. Because, Austrian economics has been around for a while. Bitcoin's been around for 10 years. But to sit with the discussion, we had Max Hillebrand in this group. It was great. It was my buddy Tib, Zane. Justin was there for a little bit, but we kept going with it. And Max Hillebrand, who is just an Austrian economics, enthusiast, who he rereads the books for fun on the weekends or whatever. When we were all just discussing and bouncing all these ideas off each other in the language of Austrian logic, we came to some pretty amazing conclusions just constantly. And we would get to the end of the call. We were like, we have to stop. My mind hurts from all these mind blows. So that was definitely my wow moment. Cause then I really finally started to understand it. And, when I was before I understood that stuff, I was debating with people on Reddit a lot about kind of economic principles. After, so you like take the knowledge that you learn from Andreas, and you could try to debate economics. I realized that my economics knowledge is extremely lacking, but I did end up doing a lot of research, and I found we have this concept of sound money, right, versus the fiat money. And in my research, I was reading about the gold standard and Bretton Woods, and I started finding a lot of really interesting charts, which kind of leads me to the website that we started. What the fuck happened in 1971? The whole idea for it was that my buddy Colin from Bitcoin Echo Chamber podcast. He saw me. I almost everywhere when I was talking about Bitcoin, I'd start bringing these charts up and being, look, when the gold standard ended, a lot of things changed, and it's right there in the data. It's very clear to me, and I just started sharing them everywhere. And we were just joking around one time, and he was like, what if we mean that into existence as like a thing? What the fuck happened in 1971? So we just, all these charts that I've been sharing, we kind of just threw them up on a site and didn't put anything else on there, and just let people draw their own conclusions. And those have been really, really interesting.
I just had a look through some of them, and seeing the data there and having them all together. I'm sure you've had this before. You'll say, oh, well, it came off the gold standard and all these problems started happening. And you try and explain it to them, and people might say, oh, well, correlation isn't causation. It could be something else. But when you see chart after chart after chart after chart after chart, all pointing to, like you say, what the fuck has happened in 1971? It's really nice to have it in one place. So have you had good feedback from sort of normal non-Bitcoin people who have had a look at it, or is it more Bitcoiners who are spending time looking through it?
No, it, much to our surprise, because we don't really mention Bitcoin at all on the website.
No.
Picked up. You wouldn't believe, we've seen it in Bernie Sanders subreddits.
Really?
We've seen it on Goldbug sites for sure. And you get all sorts of responses. Usually, I think pretty much everywhere we see it pop up, you see somebody go, yeah, clearly it's the end of the Bretton Woods gold standard, and obviously inflation, picked up. And there's usually one guy that really, kind of elucidates that. And sometimes there's a little bit of criticism, but there's never fails that there's always somebody going, actually, it was, oil prices spiked then, or the end of unions.
Sorry, Ben, I've lost you. It's gone quite bad, the signal. I don't know if you can hear me. Are you there?
We're back?
Yeah, we're back. I don't know what is going on with this fucking thing.
That's all right.
It's still recording, I believe. It all looks okay. I lost you at, there's always somebody who says it's something to do with oil prices. That was about the last thing I think I heard.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is, it's surprising how everyone has their own, explanation, whether it be, unions ending or women in the workforce or oil prices. But obviously, our understanding is that the monetary paradigm shifting. And, if you're looking at the website now, I think probably the most interesting chart on there is, it says Figure 1 Consumer Price Index. And it goes from 1775 until 2012.
That's the first on my list of, that was the number one. I've got my ones that really stood out were CPI, major currencies trending against gold, and actually the divorce rates and incarceration rates really stood out to me. Okay. They're pretty shocking, and I think a lot of what's talked about on Bitcoin Twitter, and money is really a foundation for everything else, and that without having a solid monetary base, everything gets out of whack, which is scary.
For that is because money is the tool by which humans collaborate, right?
Yes.
In fact, it is the tool that allowed us to scale society from beyond just being able to trade directly with people, because trade requires not only a coincidence of wants, but it also it often requires trust. And money is a universal commodity, a most liquid commodity in an economy that it eliminates the multi-coincidence of wants because it's so liquid you can trade it for anything. And the price system that emerges out of this paradigm is the mechanism by which we can all assess the value of things. The time value it takes to create the thing, the skill value it takes to create the thing. And it allows us to cooperate on creating things whose parts might be sourced all over the world. When you make an iPhone, there's all these different minerals and ores that were refined, and these plastics and glasses and wires and rubber and all these other things. And they're not, it's not like one factory is refining all those different things. It's taking those pieces from all around the world in order to create this one thing. And those people in the other places in the world that are creating those things aren't being called up by the Foxconn factory and saying, hey, can you produce this exactly in this amount? And can you produce this? That's not how it works. It's the price system that tells them whether or not it's, they should be making more or less of certain things because they can assess the value that they can get for that thing. And when the CPI or when the price is being changed by the supply of money, then it distorts those price signals. And I say that distorts our society itself. It corrupts our society. You can also look at this from the side of the cost to borrow money, right? Where we see today, at least in the United States, but I think it's pretty similar everywhere else, is that the interest rate has been cut back to zero again. We did 10 years of 0% interest rates after the great financial crisis, and now it's put back to zero. And what that tells people is that the cost to borrow money is zero, that the time value of money itself is zero. And if it goes negative, man, then that breaks the whole idea of lending money in the first place. Because if I'm going to lend you money, I'm going to expect a return. And if I can get it from the Fed or get it from somebody who's really close to the Fed for much lower than what would be set on the market, what that tells you is that that the cost to borrow that money and then, start a company or keep a company going, by the way, has been distorted, and that it may appear that it's a profitable company based on that. But in reality, we're seeing today that a lot of companies don't really have any cash on hand. They're running on lots of debt. And today, because of this huge economic downturn we've seen from the global pandemic that we have going on, that these businesses are all at high risk of failure. And I attributed that to the problem of fiat money because we don't have any saving, because it doesn't make sense to hold savings, and it's compounding on top of it.
Yeah. It's the incentives. It's the incentives are out of whack is basically the thing. Like, no, unless you're a fucking idiot, you're not going to put money into a bank account that's going to yield you negative interest or zero because it's stupid. It's stupid. Yeah. Right.
But you put it in stocks and bonds and all this stuff. But then we've seen, stocks have all crashed now. So all of people's the wealth that they thought they had, because the stocks weren't the most liquid. See, they're using stocks as money, right? And we all understand this concept. We're using stocks and bonds, and we're using real estate as money because money isn't good at being money. That has now broken the concept of money, because now when all of those people needed that liquidity in this horrible, pandemic that we have going on, we have great uncertainty. This is when we need cash balances. This is why we hold cash balances, because of uncertainty. So, the people that didn't pull their money out before the crash happened, now they've lost that, that value because, and again, that's, it's people pulling money out of those risky investments, to get into liquidity. The most liquid thing is the US dollar, and it's up against everything else because of that uncertainty. But, I argue that with good money, we would have held cash balances instead of, just, investing, 80% of our money into the stock market. We would actually just have cash balances and the crash wouldn't have been as bad, and that complicates things. So, I don't know if that explained that well.
No, you've explained it very well. But just for the listeners and people who, some people are a little bit newer to this possibly, can you just talk through what does it mean when we're looking at this chart? And I ask anyone who is listening to this, go on to WTFhappenedin1971.com, and I think it's the first chart, isn't it? Let's just have a look. No, is it the second? Where is it? I think it's the fourth chart down, and just have a look at this. But what does this mean in real terms to people? How does this affect them? We're talking about the fact that people are having to invest this money into other assets like property and stocks and bonds and everything else to preserve some of that value so that they don't get hit as hard, or their purchasing power being eroded away. What does it mean to the normal person?
Well, I think if you just kind of look at the chart, you can kind of dissect it. When I found this chart, it didn't have the 1971 line on it. It just had 1913 creation of the Federal Reserve. So if you look before the creation, so this is the chart right now is indicating three separate paradigms, right? You have the space before the 1913, and you can see that this price level does change, but it's within this range, and it's pretty steady from 1775 until 1910. So over 100 years. And then you see the creation of the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. And you can see it kind of isn't really too crazy, and it does start to get a little bit more crazy as you start to get into the 50s and the 60s. And then in 1971, it just absolutely explodes. And what that chart is telling you
Sorry, I don't know what is happening here. I lost you again. I lost you at when we hit 1971. What happens there?
Okay. You're still recording, right?
I'm still recording. Yeah. I'll edit all of these bits and put it to mishmash it together a little bit.
Sure. Can I actually pause for a minute?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's something else out too. So give me 1 minute. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Are you
Sorry
all right
about that?
Yeah, no problem. Hold on, let me get these along. Zoom's normally all right. I don't tend to have any problems with it, so I can only think it's just everyone loaded onto it.
Yeah, it's not you, man. It's the crazy world we live in today, where everyone's loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said in 1971, in my opinion, the fall from the gold standard has allowed inflation beyond most people's understanding. In the 70s, we saw very high CPI inflation, but they changed the calculation in 1980, and they changed it again in 1990. And so if you go by the 1970 numbers, we're still at very high inflation. We're still at 9-10% inflation. And I think it's really hard to understand. If you look at this chart, I think it's really easy to understand how bad it really is. But I don't know.
It literally, for anyone who's not looking at it, it looks like a rocket has just taken off. It hits 1971 and a rocket takes off. And to be honest, although people don't seem to understand, I don't think most people really even understand what inflation is. They sort of, they know sort of roughly, but they don't fully understand. But what they do feel is when they go to the shops or when they go and order a drink, and I feel it. I mean, even before looking into this stuff, you go back 10 years and you order a drink and it was X, and now it's 3 times that. And the same with housing, and the same with, like we say, student loans and education, and all this stuff has just got so out of whack that people, especially like the millennials, they're living at home. They can't afford to buy a property. They don't own anything. Everything's on finance. And they're just thinking, well, what the hell, how do I live the life that my parents lived? And it's not possible. And it seems like this is why. I think they feel it. They just don't know why it's happening.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know where you lost me.
Did you hear me the whole time?
I was just rambling, I think, and then it cut out.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm 100% agreeing with you. I think, that people do understand that this is a problem, but they don't attribute it to inflation. They just say, oh, the cost is rising, right? So inflation, in economic terms, is actually talking about an increase in the money supply, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's inflation of the money supply. But colloquially, we use the word inflation to talk about rising prices, and
yes.
It's not a 1-to-1, but you can't ignore the supply side of the supply and demand equation, because we're talking about the supply and demand of money itself. And essentially, I have a thread that's pinned to my profile that states exactly this: that inflation is the greatest problem that society faces today. The rising cost of housing and medical and food are very real to people. And I, essentially what I'm trying to say is that, if you go by the CPI calculation, which, again, I don't even really think is real, because I've seen other data on, but if you go by that, then you have to raise, you have to get a 4% raise or 5% raise every single year just to keep pace with inflation from the money that you earn on a yearly basis. Forget about any savings that you could have had, because all this stuff destroys the power of saving. Every 20 years, again, if you believe the CPI numbers, your money is cut in half. So if you've been saving for 20 years of your life, 20 years, or half of that is just gone. 10 years you work for free, which is absolutely insane. People don't think about it that way.
No.
At all. And it destroys, so it punishes people who save, right? And so we were talking about earlier about how you retain a cash balance to hedge against uncertainty. It punishes those people that have been playing it safe, that did what our parents told us to do when we were young and said, save up to buy that stuff. Don't put it all on credit. The people that are putting it on credit are actually benefiting from the inflationary system, because the debt inflates over time, and it's worth less, because we're securing more money in the future. So it's like
the most successful or the best thing you could have done in the last 15, 20 years is just borrow as much money as you possibly can and buy assets.
And buy stocks and then sell them in 2007 and then buy them again in 2009 and then sell them again 2 months ago. And then you're the richest man in the world. Borrowing as much as you could. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's crazy. And it's not available to most people is the problem. People might know that. Most people, especially in the UK, they'll go, oh yeah, property prices always rise. They always go up generally, even though that's not technically true, but that's what they'll say. So they can work that out. If they could have access to that money, to borrow that money, then they would buy those assets, but they can't unless you're already rich. And that's, I think, you had another chart further on down about, it was income growth, top 1% and bottom 90%. But I think it's not just income. It's the fact that once you are wealthy in the way that the system's set up, it just puts you further and further apart. And
yes, absolutely. Yes. It's just a stratification effect from people that can hold. So, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and maybe you can squirrel away a few dollars, you need, and we're back.
If this gets too much and too irritating, just tell me and we'll have to rebook it. But, I'm happy to persevere if you are.
Yeah, just going to create some work for you in the editing room.
That's cool. That's fine. All right. That's fine.
Have you ever listened to a Marty Bent interview? Sometimes just like pee breaks and
that is my favorite podcast. I love Tales from the Crypt. It's my favorite podcast. Yeah,
well, Marty is, he's really smart, but he is a very down to earth guy. And he's very kind, and he wants to see, he wants to see change in the world in a positive way. I think it's clear to everybody in the world that something isn't working, and everyone has a different idea over, how we can fix things. But obviously the Bitcoiners believe that we should fix the money. And I think the logic tracks. I agree with Marty that, we have to unfuck the money, as he would say. That because money is the tool by which we cooperate, if the tool is being distorted constantly, then you're screwing up the cooperation of society, and you're creating winners and losers. As we were talking about the low interest rates that essentially, only banks and people very close to the central bank can get those very low interest rates, and then we still see, especially on your credit card, you still see 20% or whatever it is. And even house loans are still, 4 or 5%, even though interest rates are zero, the Fed funds. So, so the people that are closest to that spigot, that's the Cantillon effect, that they benefit more from this system. And, it's obviously not benefiting the poorest people among us. I think that's very clear. The system is not working for them. Very hard to get ahead.
100%. And then it causes all this anger. You have people, again, I'm sure you have it over there, but it's palpable here. You have people raging, saying, take the money from the wealthy. And, they have these socialist tendencies. And I understand why they feel that way. I really do, because, if you're struggling and you're doing a 9-to-5 that doesn't earn good money and you don't own property, you are just getting further and further and further behind, and they don't fully understand. So they just think, oh, well, they take it from the rich. But like you say, it's not necessarily the people who have the money. It's actually the whole system that is just weighted towards them. And I think what you're saying is, if we can unfuck the money and we can have a system that is fair and transparent, things will change. I feel rapidly.
I would build upon what you're trying to say, in fact, and reinforce that argument, because you'll see all these different measures that combat the horrible effects of inflation. One of them is called the minimum wage. One of them is a redistributionist policy of taking money from the wealthy and giving it to the poor. Another one is, I think, in my opinion, labor unions are a necessary part of an inflationary regime to protect wages for workers. So all of these things, and I think the Social Security and all these other welfare, Medicare and all these other welfare programs are also other artifacts. And these things are all Band-Aid solutions. Okay. So if the system isn't working out for poor people, let's just take a bunch of money from the rich people and give it. You won't fix society, in my opinion. You'll just you'll Band-Aids, and you'll be like, this is, I'm not very articulate about it, but I think you get the point.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I think trying to, like you say, put Band-Aids on a thing it's just completely fucked. And
running around putting out fires. Right?
Yeah. I think the thing is, again, like, no one knows that there's an alternative. People will present all these ideas and none of them are perfect, but what they're not taking into account is maybe it's the entire system that needs to have an overhaul. And they say to somebody, do you vote left or do you vote right or do you vote Bitcoin? They're like, what do you mean? What do you mean do you vote Bitcoin? You're like, and if you try and explain that actually effectively you are voting when you're buying it and you're holding it, it's very difficult to get this point across. I've still not found, I don't know about you, have you found a way when you're speaking to a normal person to explain this stuff? Or is it even possible to explain this stuff in a day?
So no, it's not. And a normal person is somebody who doesn't obsess over a weird magic internet money and spend hundreds of hours of research, right?
Thousands.
So I've kind of changed my approach a little bit. I've let a number of people that are very close to me that I trust a lot know that I've researched this thing, and I think it is very important to understand if you want to understand the future, because I believe it is only going to keep growing. But I have no intention of trying to convince them of anything. If they're interested in it, I'll encourage them to grab a small amount, or maybe I'll point them to a few resources. But I like to just let them know that I'm here if they have questions. Because if you go back to the beginning of the pod, you asked me how I got into Bitcoin, and learning about, anonymous internet markets and all that stuff, or how this decentralized system worked, didn't do it for me at the time. And I was technically inclined. What did it for me was number go fucking up.
It does.
And I was like, whoa, what's this thing? Now I'm interested again. Right? And that's what it's going to do for people. And why is the number going to keep going up? Well, as Matt Odell likes to say, I think Bitcoin is the best money we've ever seen. And as more people realize that, the price should rise. And the reason it's the best money we've ever seen is because it can't be diluted and it protects your savings, right? Your long-term savings. So even if the price is volatile in the short term because this market largely doesn't understand this thing that requires hundreds of hours of research and economics. And the other thing I talk about, I don't remember if I sent it to you, if you can include it in the show notes, is the Bitcoin spectrum.
No.
I did a whole podcast with Colin on the Bitcoin Echo Chamber about the Bitcoin spectrum. And there's this giant Venn diagram of all the different disciplines that you're required to understand. These competing disciplines like cryptography and computer science and economics and politics. And I don't have it in front of me right this moment, but you have to understand all of these different things.
Multidisciplinary.
Paradigm. And it's not trivial, I don't claim to be an expert in all of them, but you need to have a base knowledge to see how because you'll see the FUD stuff that pops up, like the Bitcoin is going to boil the oceans, or that it's going to be replaced by quantum cryptography, or all these other things. You really have to have a solid understanding.
Yeah, we've gone again.
Where did you drop off?
Just literally when we started talking about having to understand the multidisciplinary, the boiling the oceans is where we got to. And then it just literally goes, like 10 times slower sort of speed, and then just cuts out, and it just does it every time. Yeah, so it's,
that's okay. I mean, you don't have to include that part, or I can try to say it again.
Yeah, so we got to, you basically were saying that it's multidisciplinary, and that until you understand, all this FUD, you were saying, the different types of FUD. Yeah,
like it's hard to kill the FUD, right? So, there's a guy with Fun with Bitcoin podcast. His name is Coin Icarus. And one of the things he said to me was that I wake up every day and I try to kill Bitcoin, and I can't. So if I can't kill Bitcoin, then I keep working on it. I keep being enthusiastic about it. And that's why people should come into this space and be extremely skeptical, and try to question everything. But in order to question everything, you need to understand an immense spectrum of different disciplines. And most people, probably don't have a good enough handle on those things to adequately criticize it. And yet they probably will criticize it anyway.
Well, I think it comes down to you've got to be, and I'm talking about myself here, a bit of a fucking loser to spend this much time. You've got to be a little bit there's not many people who are going to throw thousands and thousands of hours at learning about monetary policy and cryptography and all, that's one. And then two, even if you are that sad, a lot of people just don't have the time. It is a massive time vamp. So like you say, it's just throwing that time at it. For most people doing a 9 to 5, it's just not possible. I found out about this stuff. I literally stopped work 2 years ago, and I haven't gone back because I've just been obsessing. Because it's so interesting that, and if we're right, it makes such an important change to the world that you can't. I'm only starting to really wrap my head around it, but I can't think about anything else now. It's too important and interesting.
Well, because we think it will change the world significantly, and we think it will change the world for the better. And that's why it's so fascinating to me. And that's why I can't look away from it, because I always wanted to be a part of something that changes the world. And I've always wanted to see people do better. And I think it's sad to see. I have so many people that I know that work extremely hard and are, just scraping by. And I've always kind of wondered, why things aren't going so well. And I feel like I've finally understood why. It's this insidious underlying mechanism of our money that's broken that we can't see, because we just see that the thing costs a little bit more the next time we go to the store.
It's hard to see, right? When you speak to people and you see, like you're saying, they're working their bollocks off and they're trying their best and they're just struggling, or they're just treading water. And if you know these people, I've just turned my video off, by the way. I'm hoping it maybe saves some bandwidth or something to maybe stop it from jumping out again. I don't know if that'll work or not. But it is hard to see. And I think it's something that's happening for a lot of people. It's not, it's not a small percentage of people who are struggling. It's a lot.
Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
So, yeah, at least this is some brain training for us. We have to keep remembering what we were talking about. Where were we? We were talking about, basically this being society, making serious changes to the world and it being important enough to spend, that once you're sucked in, it's difficult to step away and think about anything else because everything else seems pretty dull. I can't imagine going back into an office job or sales or something like that when in the back of your head you're thinking, I know about something that can change the world or has the potential to. And I guess that's what draws us all in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And there's an argument to be made that you can just buy some Bitcoin and forget about it and, wait 10 years and go about your life and not worry about it. But I think this thing, it's still evolving and it's still growing. And I still want to be a part of that movement in a sense. And I'd like to. It's fascinating to me intellectually because it's the most challenging thing I think I've ever tried to understand because it touches so many aspects of life and so many different disciplines, and it keeps me interested in that way, and it keeps my mind sharp in a sense, and I don't think I could ever just ignore it anymore because it is still fascinating to watch it unfold and watch like the Lightning Network unfold. And I just saw 6102 on Twitter was talking about how, is liquid Bitcoin, you shouldn't call that Bitcoin. You should call them tokens redeemable from this, federation. And I love watching that dialogue and watching smart people disagree and
yes,
that. That's always going to be fascinating, I think. Until Bitcoin is global money and the protocol is ossified and
then it's boring.
Probably.
And then it's boring, and then all the suits will be interested in it, and we'll all leave.
Well, yeah, as Max Hillebrand said, there's no there's no US dollar Twitter. There's no US dollar community that talks about the US dollar. So, once Bitcoin hyper-Bitcoinization happens, then there'll be nothing to discuss. I guess we'll just have to go back to our lives, and
that would be sad. Even if number go up and it really go up and it becomes global money, it will be kind of sad. I'd miss it.
No, it won't, dude. Max, it will. As Brady says from Citizen Bitcoin, it's the dawn of the Bitcoin Renaissance. If we can finally store our wealth, if we can finally cooperate on scales that are unimaginable, we're going to scale society so rapidly, and technology is going to develop better, and energy solutions. And
that's true. I think that is true.
We'll see incredible things to come, and I think that's society is still pretty amazing, and we still develop new technologies all the time. I think I sit around and think about when I was first learning about the internet when I was around 10 years old. And it's just imagining all the things you could do once the internet could scale and, once, computers would get a little smaller. And here we are doing that, talking, across the world. Even despite the challenges we have with digital, I still think it's pretty incredible, all the stuff that we see. And it's, like inflation is a slow creeping thing that it's hard to see it happening. Sometimes we forget to take a look back at what life was like even 10 years ago. It's pretty massive,
true.
How much we've increased productivity and our ability to communicate and cooperate.
That's very true, and I think you're right. This is, I guess, sort of the base is, and what you're pointing to in your website is that unfuck the money, make people realize there's a problem, present an alternative, which we think we've possibly got, and then rebuild and start to, like you're saying, like a renaissance. I mean, the things that could be possible if we get this right, are mind blowing. And I think you're hinting at it's kind of people couldn't imagine what the internet was going to do. I think it's the same with Bitcoin. I mean, do you have some projects or ideas that you're paying attention to that you or ideas of things you think could happen that really excite you?
Yeah, I think that, you hear people say it all the time, but I think things like BTC Pay, and, being able to cheaply run a node off like a Raspberry Pi device are so incredibly powerful to places in emerging markets, because they can, for $50 get a Raspberry Pi and have a global marketplace, completely self-sovereign global marketplace. They can't be deplatformed from it. It's permissionless. All they need is barely a connection to the internet, and it can be extremely low bandwidth, and they can accept payments from anywhere in the world, and they can offer their services from anywhere in the world. And there'll be even more geographic arbitrage. And that's great for the world as a whole, I think, because I think you see a lot of financial oppression in a lot of different places. So I just think little things like that, it doesn't feel like this exciting killer app, but the paradigm shift that is involved in that is, I think, kind of hard to grasp.
Yeah, when you say it, and especially when we talk about this stuff on Bitcoin Twitter, you don't get numb to it, but you're like, oh yeah, that's normal. But when you really think about it, like you've just said, for any human being on the planet with an internet connection, for say $100, they can now participate and earn money and spend money and set up a business and communicate with anyone else in the world. And there's no barriers. That is mental.
And you can take it down even cheaper than that. I mean, if you don't need this, complete self-sovereign node with BTC Pay server and all these other things on it, you can just run it off of a $20 Android device, which are, they're found everywhere. Even in the poorest countries have these things everywhere. And you use a generator and hop on a mesh network, and it can be much cheaper than that. And I think that's fantastic, because I think these people barely have access to good money in the places that they exist in. Not only do you get access to good money, but you get access to a global financial system. And that is really paradigm shifting. And it will take a while, but it's really not, once if things start to catch on and a small country in Africa or something all of a sudden starts, being really interested in Bitcoin, the way that they can adopt it is so rapid, and it's so there's so little barrier to do it that it can happen so quickly. Don't blink. And it's never. I can say this with 100% confidence. It's never ever going to be possible for these people to go and open a bank account and go through things and start a business like we have the opportunity to in parts of UK and United States. They just can't, and that infrastructure will never be there for them. The fact that this creates that possibility, people underestimate quite how important that is. And like you say, if it does catch on, and you do have, you have a kid in India who's doing cartoon drawings and he's selling them online on Fiverr or one of these, similar sort of websites, and he's earning Bitcoin. They could effectively, if we do see the price rises that I think we're all expecting, they could suddenly dig themselves out of a seriously bad situation and actually do very, very well. And that's just not possible with any other technology. Yeah, and take that money and reinvest it in their own community, I think the countries that have been, the first world countries, as we say, developed markets, have been kind of benefiting off the back of emerging markets for quite some time, and there's a lot of geographic arbitrage to happen. And I think a kind of a leveling of the playing field is great.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and there is nothing else that can do it. What do you see as the biggest barrier to that, other than just, people being aware of the technology? And I think that is difficult for people to wrap their head around. But other than that, what do you see as a barrier? Is it just, do you see it as it's scaling, or do you see it as something else for these people to jump in? Do we need the Lightning Network to be more accessible to people so that they can do smaller transactions in these sort of countries? Or
there's two big barriers. One is really easy to understand. It's just time. Building liquidity and building the tools, and building understanding just takes time. The second barrier, I think, is, and this kind of goes to the first one, is that custody is tough to do when you have self-sovereignty. It's scary to be able to lose all of your funds, and I think that is very scary.
Yes,
but I think a combination of time and us developing better tools and better methods, in addition to a greater understanding, and learning how to diversify risk and getting better at digital security, and getting a little better at physical security, and kind of getting away from this whole, letting big corporations and big governments take care of us, that we kind of learn how to take care of ourselves a little better. That's positive in the long term, but it just takes time. It's not something that can happen overnight.
Absolutely. I think especially for the, like you're saying, the first world countries who are so used to having their hand held and everything being easy and relying on someone else, and someone else is going to protect me. And if my money gets lost, then someone else is going to insure it. And I think almost it's a bigger change for them than it is for people in these third world countries that have it hard. And I think maybe they are going to be I kind of hope they're going to be the people to adopt it quicker. But like you say, it needs to be more usable. And I guess that's, like you say, that only comes with more liquidity and sort of people building products to make it easier for people.
Yeah, and I think that is still happening. Building liquidity is the price going up in the first place, and that helps with that short-term volatility as well. I think the long-term volatility has proven itself to be, overwhelmingly in the positive direction. The short-term volatility does kind of hold people back a little bit, but as more people come in and more halvings go through, and Bitcoin gets harder and harder. As harder money, that liquidity will continue to build, and that part will get easier. And as tools are being developed, I do, to answer your other question, I think the Lightning Network is, I do believe that the Lightning Network is kind of the key going forward for smaller transactions, and I think larger transactions will still happen at the base layer. It's really hard to see. I think there will be other scaling solutions as well. Things like Liquid. I don't know. I think that works really well for exchanges, for example.
Yes.
I think, I don't think the future is clear. And that's, again, why I'm still so fascinated by this industry, because, nobody really has all the answers. Even the smartest people among us, they still, are still disagreeing on a daily basis. So I certainly don't claim to have all the answers. But I'm pretty bullish on the Lightning Network. I think the channel management thing will kind of be abstracted away. And I think the solutions to, problems like how do I get incoming liquidity aren't as hard as I even imagined them to be 6 months ago. And I started to realize that you can just kind of, loop it or pay it to some other balance, and I think a lot of that stuff can be abstracted away. It just takes time,
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have said this, but time does seem to go sort of differently in the Bitcoin space. And when I really think, and it really does. I mean, I think back, it was only, I don't know, a year and a half ago or whatever it was, when the Lightning Network there was only a few nodes on the network. No one was using it. And if I think back to, I'm bad with times, but it was roughly that sort of time, a year and a half. And I think from then to now, I wouldn't have even dreamt of messing around with it. I wouldn't have even dreamt of setting up a node. I wouldn't have even dreamt of any of this stuff. And now I'm like, yeah, okay, it's easy enough. So what happens in another year or two? It does seem that it's easy to sort of think, oh, things are a bit slow, or, it doesn't feel like it's moving fast enough. But when you really zoom out, things are moving at a staggering rate.
Yeah, I mean, just look at what it was like to transact on Bitcoin in the early days, using Bitcoin Core versus today, where there's just an app on your phone and it's still self-sovereign. And I think people have a hard time extrapolating and seeing how technology and how software and how things can scale, and really looking how that will work in the future. It's very difficult for people to do. And I think you saw that with the internet, with people like Krugman saying that it'll amount to nothing more than fax machines.
Yeah.
And you can see that in the opposite sense too, that sometimes, people's predictions about the future are so wildly off, even very, very smart people. So, the future is unknowable, and, we should all work to kind of, try to create the future that we want to see,
Is the future unknowable, or did Satoshi, is he come back from the future? Has he seen the shit that is about to hit the fan and all the problems? And is he come back from the future? Do you have a sort of
time travelers? I find that scenario highly improbable.
Me too, but it's fun.
Most accurate way I can say it. I think, if you look at Ansel Linder has an amazing chart, and I can send you these. You can include them in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's the development of Bitcoin, and 80% of it occurs before 2009, and it's all of these different technologies. And all of these different experimentations, like Xiaomi eCash and Hashcash and proof of work and reusable proof of work and cryptography and all of these different things put together. That once they were just in just the right recipe, they birthed the dawning of this new era. So while the code is pretty interesting and the mantras of the code are pretty amazing, really the system itself wasn't that revolutionary. It was just combining all these things together that created this revolutionary thing. So I don't think, Satoshi's some kind of deity. I think he just kind of basically understood some basic concepts about sound money and about cryptography, and he was just in the right place and maybe had access to just the right people, and saw just the right things that happened before it. And, it was kind of just the right place, right time. Dan Held has some amazing writings about planting the seed and all that really,
he's awesome, Dan.
Explain that much better than I could.
But it is interesting. I mean, I completely agree with you. And my personal, not that it matters, but I like to think about these things. My guess, if I had to put money on it, is it was Hal Finney. That's my guess. But it is fun to think about these crazy ideas and how it all was put together, because it is so world changing, and the fact that nobody knows obviously is great. It helps the system, but when you spend so much time on this stuff, I'd love to know. I'd love to know who it is. I'd love to just have some sort of insight into it all. Yeah,
well, the human mind is always curious about what it doesn't know, and I think that's natural. But I think the smartest thing I've ever heard about Satoshi is the people saying the smartest thing he ever did was disappear, because
absolutely
we tend to want to deify him, and I think that's really, really negative on our journey, because the thing has become decentralized enough now that nobody controls it, and that's the only way that the thing can move forward. If anybody controls it, then it's game over, man. Because the temptation to print money is far too great. And history has shown us time and time again that humans cannot resist that temptation. So unless we take that control away from everybody, that it will continue to go on. The debasement of our currency, and therefore the debasement of our society, it has been an unending sad story. If you look out back in thousands of years. And what's amazing about this decentralized protocol is that it incentivizes us all to protect that, protect our own wealth, our own selfish needs. We will protect the decentralization of this thing, I think. Until we face the final bosses, I guess.
I completely agree, and I think that is the one, like you say, one of the most brilliant things that was ever done was stepping away. But also, just one thing that I find so clever is the way that it, like you say, the incentive structure, the game theory behind this thing is that just it like you say, it uses human greed. It is using our greed to make this more secure. And that's so clever. The fact that, sort of my hope is that people, the more powerful people, the people who pull the strings, the smart ones will start to invest in this. And once they've got that skin in the game, then the incentive suddenly is for them to allow this thing to, or to help this thing. I have a feeling that it's starting to happen. It feels like now it's starting to happen.
Yeah, but we saw U.S. congressmen, in the past 12 months speak positively about Bitcoin, extremely positively. And at least one of those said that, he doesn't own any because he doesn't want a conflict of interest. But that situation you're describing is called the principal agent problem, right? That all it takes is a few of these guys in power to be like, oh, you know what, we can profit off of this, just by holding some. And maybe FUD for a little while and say, Bitcoin's bad and it's for terrorists. And then all of a sudden, all I have to do is pass a law that says, oh, now there's no capital gains taxes on Bitcoin and taxes. And all of a sudden, their bags are pumped. So, the incentives are pretty hard to ignore.
It's very clever. All right. Well, look, I don't want to take too much of your time up, but what I wanted to just finish on is if you are right, and I think you are, and if this thing continues to suck in more and more liquidity and people develop better and better systems and make it more accessible to more people, do you have a vision or an idea of how this is going to change society? Because the charts sort of hint, where we talked earlier about, divorce rates, incarceration rates, the sort of idea that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. And we've got all these problems in society. Say you're right and say this thing takes off and more people start using it. What sort of change do you think is going to happen to society? And do you think it's going to be positive?
I think in general, we'll be a much more prosperous society. I think you'll continue to see the cost of things going down and the ability to save money again going up, and the financialization of the world, the Wall Streetization, the stock marketization of the world is going to slowly kind of disappear. And I think you'll see less seniorage and less of the rich getting richer, like you said. I mean, and that, that's leading to turmoil throughout the world today. The protests in France and the power grabs that we see in the United States, where, it seems like the scales are being tipped further and further on both sides of the political spectrum. That that is due to, economic strife, in my opinion. So the less you see of that, the less extremism there is. There's less, I'm fine with some people having more money than others, but, this stratification system that we're talking about keeps the people that are having it the hardest, it keeps them down, and it keeps the people that have it the easiest, the wealthiest, it keeps them up. And I just, that's frustrating to me. So it's not that I want, equality, but I definitely think that there is a lot of inequality, and it's unjust. It's not just because those people worked harder or they were luckier or whatever. I think the system is fundamentally broken. So I don't like to, make predictions about what society would look like, but I just think it will be just in general more prosperous. And I think there's already, the people I meet in this world, whether they be poor or rich, are in general very, good people that want the best for everybody. And I don't, want a few nefarious actors to be able to take that away from them. So I just think it'll be better. It in a lot of ways, but I don't know how to answer that question.
No, I tend to agree. I think that things will get better. And I think what you said earlier is really important, that things will get better, but it takes time. And I think just being patient it's really hard, but I think it's important because these things do take time. And if anything good takes a lot of time and effort.
That is very true.
All right. Well, Ben, we've had some problems, obviously, with technical issues, which has been a pain in the arse. So thank you very much for sticking with me. And thank you so much for joining me on the call. It's been really, really good to chat to you. And I urge any of my listeners to go onto your website, WTFhappenedin1971.com, and have a look through the charts, because even if you're not a Bitcoiner, go and take a look and just ask the question, what the fuck happened in 1971?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, I appreciate you sticking with me as well. And I appreciate people for listening and understanding that we got off track a little bit because of the technical difficulties. But show must go on, and
exactly,
it's still just as important. And I appreciate you having me. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, at MRCOOLBP, and reach out anytime if you have any questions. I'd love to chat.
Excellent. Well, I'm gonna link your Twitter and all the information in the show notes as well. And yeah, anyone who wants to get in touch, definitely follow your Twitter, because it's really, really good, and definitely get onto the website. It's very interesting. And yeah, thank you again. I'm going to end the recording now, and I will just chat to you for 2 minutes, and then yeah, we're done.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks a lot.